Hello and welcome to this episode of the Her Success Podcast. We are the podcast that interview highly successful and aspirational women with the view to inspiring the next generation of leaders within the tech and engineering world. The podcast is brought to you by Engtal. Engtal is a leading engineering and technology recruitment firm. If you're an engineer looking for your next position, or you're a company that wants to partner with a recruitment firm that truly cares about diversity, equity, and inclusion, please get in contact. Today, we interview Lisa Ventura. Lisa is an expert in cybersecurity awareness. She's also a writer, a speaker, and openly neurodivergent. Last year, she was also awarded an MBE by King Charles, and she has a really varied and rich background. So I'm excited to chat with her. Without further ado, let's get to the show. Hello and welcome everyone to this episode of the Her Success Podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Lisa Ventura, MBE. Lisa is a subject matter expert in cybersecurity. She's also a writer, a speaker, as well as a health and wellness coach. In addition to that, Lisa also has an MBE for services to cybersecurity and diversity and inclusion. So I'm really excited to dive into Lisa's very varied background. So firstly, Lisa, thank you so much for being on the show and welcome.
Thank you. It's an absolute honor to be here today, Chris. Thank you.
Excellent. And as I said before, great to have a fellow Brit on the show. But first things first, I'd love to get just a bit of an overview of your background and journey. What inspired you to get into the cybersecurity world and how your career started and how it's evolved up to today?
So I had quite a non-linear journey into the cybersecurity industry, and I transitioned into cyber in 2009. But prior to that, I'd spent a number of years working in the entertainment industry with Chris Tarrant of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire fame at his management company. Did that for quite a while and saw Millionaire go from a format on paper called Cash Mountain to the global phenomenon that it eventually became. But my ex-husband was very high up as a penetration tester and did a lot of work for the government, for the MOD, etc., and worked for Kinetic. So I was exposed to that world, if you like, through him very early on. And I was always really fascinated around the psychology of hacking, the mind of the hacker, what drives them to do it apart from the monetary side of things, and also the social engineering side and the psychology of how we can see something or a phishing email or an online scam, etc., and the psychology around it and how cyber criminals will use social engineering to trick us into clicking on those links and so on. So in 2009, he then founded a cybersecurity software development company that I subsequently ended up joining when I came out of the entertainment industry to help him with his workload. So I helped him grow that business for a few years. And then when we separated and subsequently divorced, I found that I was actually more upset about coming away from the business than I was about the end of the marriage. That's a whole other the story. I knew I wanted to stay within cybersecurity. So I went to work at BT and worked on their Assure Cyber product, and then branched out into the cybersecurity awareness side of things and cybersecurity awareness training. I also founded the UK Cybersecurity Association, which is now known today as Cybersecurity Unity. And I founded that around about 2014, 2015, when I spotted a gap where there are organizations that are out there in terms of, you've got BCS, you've got TIER, etc. There's lots of bodies that have cyber as part of them, but they tend to focus a lot more on the IT side of things as well, like BCS and CSEC, etc. So I founded the UK Cybersecurity Association purely to focus just on cybersecurity. So it was one of the first cybersecurity dedicated trade bodies, which is now rebranded to being Cybersecurity Unity. So I do a lot in terms of writing. I've been published in various publications. I do a lot of speaking as well on various topics and themes within cybersecurity. And as you rightly said, I was awarded an MBE in King Charles III's birthday honours list last year for services to cybersecurity and diversity and inclusion. And no one was more shocked than me when I got that letter, and boy, did my imposter syndrome go through the roof, I can tell you. So.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll touch on that Did you have a cool ceremony? Did you meet any of the royals?
I had my MBE presented to me by King Charles himself at an investiture ceremony last December. Yes, so I met him. Yeah.
Amazing. As a big fan of the Royals, I'm yeah, a little starstruck. That is incredible, and yeah, I can only imagine what the imposter syndrome was doing in that scenario. I know it certainly would be for me. This may be a broad question, but what is it about cybersecurity that really sparks your passion and that you really excites you? I guess.
I wouldn't say excited, but I think for me is it's all about that awareness raising piece because even though we're in 2024, I still have conversations with some smaller businesses and SME businesses that will go, well, we're too small. We don't need to worry about our cybersecurity. They're not going to bother with us. Hackers aren't going to steal anything that we've got because we're much too small to be worried about. And it's like, well, but what about your supply chains? As they are secure as they could be. So for me, it's all about getting that awareness out there, and particularly to those smaller businesses and SMEs, to say to them that you really do need to think about your cybersecurity, posture, and ensuring that you've got, even if it's just some of the basics of cyber hygiene in place with things like two-factor authentication, etc. It's amazing how many don't even do that. So for me, that's I don't know whether it's the word excite, but for me, it's getting that awareness out there and actually seeing businesses implement that stuff. But also, I think from an individual perspective as well, a lot of individuals don't think they need to worry about their security. And I know so many people have been caught out with things like even the WhatsApp mum and dad scam because they're running around, they're busy, they get a text, they think it's from their son or daughter, couple of clicks, they've transferred some money, and by which time it's too late. So for me, it is really about that awareness raising piece, and that's what I do in terms of the cybersecurity awareness training with organisations. And I also work with HR departments to get them to embed cyber awareness training as part of their onboarding processes as well. You see it in a lot of the bigger organizations, but again, the smaller ones don't tend to consider cybersecurity when they're onboarding new members of staff. So that's something I'm very big on as well.
Oh, it's a good point. I mean, we're a smaller organisation. We've never done anything like that. So yeah, that's a very good point. I do think a lot of people don't even appreciate how damaging it can be. I remember I read an article, I think it was about a year ago, about a business that were a smaller organization. I think they were maybe $300,000 in sales and 25 people or something along those lines, maybe less. And they got hacked and they lost, I think it was $75,000 and the business went under. And I don't think people really appreciate if you don't have the right steps in place, if you don't have the right insurance and things like that, just being a small business owner, that's almost petrifying. Right? Overnight, something like that could happen and just sink your business. So again, as a business owner myself, I do really appreciate how essential something like this could be.
Absolutely. And also as well, it's not just the financial side, it's the reputational side
Mm.
of things, and that reputational management, particularly among your clients, suppliers, and so on. So it really is crucial to even just get some of the cyber hygiene practices in place.
Yeah, no, in the very early years, we had someone who created an email address pretending to be me, and they emailed one of our
Yeah.
clients basically about an invoice saying that your invoice is due, and the client had already paid the invoice, so they were never going to pay it twice. But to your point, it was just a very awkward conversation that we had to have, and the client was very frustrated at us because we've already paid this. Why are you asking? And then obviously the hacker was very pushy, being like, "You haven't paid. You need to pay it right now." We did manage to get it all resolved. But I could see that in another scenario, could be a big client loss, that could be a dent to your reputation. And yeah, like you said, that kind of like, yeah, reputation management piece, we would have been really impacted by that.
Absolutely. And what you've described happens a lot in terms of CEO fraud or the hackers spoofing email addresses to pretend to be certain key people within organizations. And then, as you rightly said, getting people to transfer money or pay or say something's not been paid when it hasn't, and so on. That's a really common cyber crime.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me a little bit about cybersecurity unity then. What really prompted you to start the organization and almost day to day? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, so a few years ago, as I said, I spotted that gap for a dedicated organisation for cybersecurity. And in terms of dating, what we do now, so the change in the rebrand for it to be known as Cybersecurity Unity came about a lot with feedback from our members as well, in that there's a lot of great work being done, not just in the UK, but on a global basis within cybersecurity. But just taking the UK alone, you've got things like you've got the National Cybersecurity Centre that does the technical side of cybersecurity. You've got the UK Cybersecurity Council that's got the remit for raising awareness of career pathways into the industry, and also the remit for standards and ethics within cybersecurity. Then there are the cyber resilience centres, and there's one in pretty much each regional area of the UK that's been set up to support small businesses and SMEs with their cybersecurity. Then there are all the certification bodies. So you've got things like IC Squared, you've got CompTIA, you've got SANS, you've got all the, and then we've got the cyber clusters here as well. So there's UKC3, and then there are all the overarching cyber clusters that they manage in different areas of the UK. And some of the feedback we had was there's some great work going on, there's some great initiatives, but a lot of people don't know where to go and who to engage with for which bits. So the rebrand to Cybersecurity Unity is that we're now creating that overarching sort of independent body, if you like. And we're doing a stakeholder mapping exercise to bring it all in together into one roof to say, right, okay, I'm a small business and I need help with my cyber posture. Great. I'm based in the West Midlands. You need the West Midlands Cyber Resilience Centre. Or I'm a student and I'm looking to get into cybersecurity. Brilliant. Engage with the council. They'll be able to help you with cyber pathways into the industry, depending on what area you're looking at getting into. So that's the ethos of cybersecurity Unity. And I do a lot in terms of my day-to-day to support our members and subscribers. We're launching a content hub soon as well. And I go out and do a lot of speaking engagements and awareness raising, and really looking for those key issues and those things that are going on. So a big thing for us at the moment is around artificial intelligence. And great as some of these initiatives are, we're doing a big awareness piece at the moment of going, hang on, some of the advice that we would be giving, say, a year or two ago might have been for things like look at the spelling and grammar of emails and look at the way it's written. With the learning language models and things like ChatGPT, that's just getting slightly harder to spot now whether an email is genuine or not. And again, if you're really busy and you're expecting a parcel from, say, DHL off the top of my head, you'll click on that link and then it's too late. So we look for those key topics, those trends, and we do a lot of work and awareness raising around that.
Nice. Yeah, it's good to know. I imagine technology is just so fast moving that you're almost fighting this kind of the hydra where you chop off one head, another one comes up, like just a constant treadmill of like staying ahead of technology trends. And I guess if you pause that for a year, the world will look very different in a year from now than it does today for those exact reasons. So yeah, that makes sense. I didn't think about using ChatGPT to create some of those like hacking emails. I'm sure you could make them look incredibly authentic compared to the ones that maybe people were receiving a year or so ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's switch gears a little bit now and talk about neurodiversity. I know that you are very, says on your LinkedIn, openly neurodivergent, and that's something that we did a topic. It was actually the first podcast we ever did. We interviewed a lady who was CEO of a firm, and 90% of their employees were neurodivergent. So they built a whole company from people on the neurodivergence spectrum. But for anyone listening that's not familiar with this, like what is neurodiversity for a start?
Yeah. So it's an umbrella term, I think, that covers a range of different, such as autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dyslexia, and so on. And for myself, as you rightly said, I have the hashtag openly neurodivergent even on my LinkedIn, and I talk a lot about being neurodivergent myself. I was diagnosed, it was actually by chance with autism in 2018, but I was then also diagnosed with the comorbidity of ADHD in January last year, and also looking at the possibility of having dyspraxia, because a lot of those signs and symptoms that I thought were just part and parcel of being autistic looks like it is a condition in its own right, which is dyspraxia. And I guess for me, in terms of how it shaped my career, I wasn't diagnosed until I was probably around about sort of 42, 43 when I was diagnosed first with autism. And when I was, it made so much sense that so much of what I struggled with in the workplace previously. For example, I would spend a week in an office and then I would come home on a Friday night and I would be so exhausted, I wouldn't start to even fully recover from that until the Sunday night. And then I've got to go and do it all over again on a Monday. But I just accepted that that's the way it was, that you go to work, you go into the office, you come home, you have your weekend. And that was how I was brought up. And that's what I did. So I just accepted that that's the way it was. And I go on with it. But I made the move to working fully remotely from home, and it made such a difference because I struggle a lot with the sensory overload of lots of noise and interruptions. And even if somebody is cooking something in a kitchen, even the smell of that, or patterns, colors, all of that stuff. And that's why I found the office environment really difficult for me. But when I was able to be in my own environment and set up the space how I wanted, I found that my productivity just went through the roof, and I was just so much better when working with in my own space. And also for me, I work better as an individual rather than in a team or in a group. So I'm really good when I've got a set number of tasks and I know what I'm doing, and I can just get on with it and focus on it and not have to sort of work with a group of people or rely on other people. So I mean, I can certainly do it, but I'm better when I'm able to just get on with my own tasks and do them to the best of my ability. So that's sort of my point into being neurodivergent. But in terms of businesses that actually want to create that culture to be neurodivergent friendly, what I would say is that every neurodivergent person is different, and there's no one size that fits all. So I think, work with your members of staff that are neurodivergent, and to put those adaptations that they might need on an individual basis in place. So one of the things I'm looking at working on at the moment is launching the idea of I guess almost like a needs passport. So it would be something like hashtag my neurodivergent needs, that sort of lists out what you need to thrive and what you need to be successful in your role and what will help you. And that could be things like that flexibility, like some remote working, or it could be having a quiet space to go into every now and again, just to be able to decompress and get away from the noise, etc. If that's something that bothers you in the way that it bothers me. So having those things listed out of saying, hi, my name is Lisa, and these are the things that I need to help me function at my best. And I think it's great for the organization and it's great for the individual as well.
We interrupt this podcast for a quick 30-second introduction to Intel, the host of Her Success. Intel is a US-based staffing agency specializing in engineering and technology. We have an insatiable passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And part of our mission is to balance the diversity scales in our industry. We are so tied to this mission that we donate $1,000 from every underrepresented placement made to our very own nonprofit, Diversify the Future. We then use the money to fund scholarships for underrepresented groups of people to help them obtain a STEM degree. If you're an engineer or a tech professional looking for a new position, or maybe a hiring talent for this space and want a recruitment partner, please get in touch.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I've worked quite a lot with neurodivergent individuals, and one of the things that I've noticed is that typically they're incredibly self-aware and they're very aware of what they need and aware of environments that they're not going to thrive in. And I think simply asking that question, right, tell me, right, what do you need? I found that to be incredibly productive. They're very open to being like, okay, this is what I struggle with. This environment is just not going to be conducive to the way that I learn. This is where I think I'm going to be at my best. And being able to accommodate that is 100%. And I thought it was interesting what you talked about initially about not being diagnosed until an older age. I think now in the current world, we're pretty good at diagnosing children at a very early age with autism and various other things. But there are people that grew up in other generations that just wasn't really a thing. And I think there are a lot of people of a certain age that go through life not realizing that some of the challenges they face are because of that. In my life, struggled with some relatively mild depression, and I just didn't recognize it for such a long period of time. There was years where I just thought this was pretty normal, and just to suck it up and get on with it because everyone has troubles and things like that. And it was only when I actually got worse and I went to the doctor and he was like, look, you have this, take this medication, and then it was completely gone within a couple of weeks. But it really opened my eyes to the fact there are so many mental health challenges that I think people don't even realize they have. And I think shining a light on that and bringing awareness to it is really critical.
Absolutely. And I think it is getting a lot better. And I think people are starting to sort of recognize now that they might have something neurodivergent that they want to look at getting a diagnosis for. The funny story was when I actually told my parents about it, and I had the diagnosis in writing. And I remember I sat them down and I told them. And again, this is a really interesting thing just from that generational perspective that you mentioned, because I sat them down, told them about it, and I said, and here it is in writing. And I remember my dad picked it up and he threw it down. He said, no. He said, no, you can't possibly be autistic. And I said, no, that's fine. I said, but
Doctor
I'd love
said
to
it, so
hear why you think that, when I'm sure the person that's diagnosed me has got a lot of experience, diagnosed many, many people. I don't think they're wrong. I'd love to hear you think why you think that they are wrong. And my mum chimed in and went, because when you were at school, not one of your teachers said to us that you might be autistic, so you can't possibly be autistic. And it really just goes to show
yeah.
that generational thing, doesn't it, of
Mhm.
how people view it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And just kind of that generation, so my grandparents'
Mm,
generation that fought in the war, and they almost have that pull your socks up kind of mentality. And
mm.
that was always something that, yeah, I thought at a young age of like, just suck it up, pretend it's not happening, move on, put it to the back of your brain, it'll go away. And after a long period of time, I realized it didn't. And yeah, I think the world will be a far better place because of the awareness and where we're at, but it
Yeah.
is a very important topic. If you were to give advice to someone that's neurodivergent, so someone that's listening to this podcast, maybe they're early in their career or they're graduating this year and about to start a career, and they're aware that they are neurodiverse, what advice would you give them?
I think for me is not being afraid to disclose it early on, because even when I was diagnosed, I was really worried about disclosing it or
Mhm.
talking openly about it, because that fear of, oh, I'm going to be judged and what people might think, or so on. So I think the best advice I can give is to not be afraid to disclose it and have those conversations with your employer quite early on, and have those discussions with HR and whoever you need to have them with as well. That's something that's really helped me. But I do appreciate how daunting it is to be able to sort of stand up and say, I am autistic and these are the things that I need to help me thrive, because I do think it is a bit weighted towards the employer's needs, but it is a two-way street. And I think if you can do that and really sort of early on say, this is what I need to help me function, and have full disclosure about being neurodivergent, it can really help.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It was interesting. Well, one of the things that I talked about in one of my previous podcasts was just how there's no such thing as normal, right? People
Mm,
use this phrase normal, but when you look at the spectrum of people and look at our work environment here, is so you have a portion of people that are neurodivergent, you have a portion of people that came from different cultures and different backgrounds, you have a portion of people that experience trauma in their lives and are carrying that. You have other people that suffer from depression and anxiety. You have other people that grew up very impoverished background and are learning to navigate the world. So that's something as well I always stress to people. It's not the world, most of the world is like this, and then neurodivergent people are over here. No one is normal. Everyone has something that they're dealing with. And I think it's very important as you build up an organization to really think about that.
And I'd love to just come in on what you said about there's no such thing as normal, and everybody's different. And that's so true, because again, for myself, I used to hide a mask so much before I was diagnosed. And I used to hide what I consider to be my sort of weird interests and things. And one of them is around anything and everything to do with nuclear war and the Cold War period, particularly of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. but I would never talk about that. I wouldn't disclose it. I always hid it. And now, if you can see behind me, I embrace it, and I've got the Protect and
Yeah.
Survive, which is from the public information films from years ago, and so on, because that interest is part of what makes me me. So I don't hide things like that anymore.
It's so much better when they are their authentic
Mm.
selves,
Yeah,
right? You're better as a friend, you're better as a partner, you're better as an employee.
yeah,
But like, if you have an environment where people can just be authentically themselves as a company, your production levels will go through the roof. If you
yeah.
don't, they won't. So not only is it ethically the right thing to do, I think there's a very real impact in the bottom line as well, because I think you'll get far more production out of people that work for you if they're able to be authentic in the working environment.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, tell us about your MBE. So that's an incredible feat. You're the first person we've had on the podcast to win an MBE. And yeah, what were some of the things that you did that allowed you to win that honor?
I think, well, not I think, I didn't know who had nominated me. I had no idea at the process. I had no idea about it until I had a letter out of the blue in May last year. But I have since discovered that it's for the work I've done with UK Cybersecurity Association, now Cybersecurity Unity, and that whole piece around building communities within the cybersecurity industry, which is something else that I've done a lot of over the years, and also being so open about being neurodivergent and talking about my struggles as someone that has autism and ADHD. So I believe it's around all that piece. And I've built a really strong presence on social media, and I talk a lot on LinkedIn and Twitter and so on, or X now as it's called. I still keep calling it Twitter. And I talk a lot as well about being neurodivergent and how I to navigate it, and things that that help me in the hopes that they can help other people. And it was just such a shock. In fact, this is a true story. The day I got the letter, the first thing I thought was, this is a scam. This is not real. First thing
Mm.
I thought. But there's a phone number at the top of it, so I'm sort of looking at the phone number thinking, I'll give it a ring, but I will put the 1471 in front of my number so they
Yeah.
can't get my number at the other end. Right, I actually went that far. I phoned the number, and it was answered by a very well spoken lady. And at that point, I thought, oh my goodness, I think this is actually real. And spoke to her for a couple of minutes, and she confirmed it absolutely was. And she said, you're not the first person to phone to check about this, but no, it absolutely is real. And then when my husband got home from work and I showed him the letter, once we got over all the congratulations, I can't believe it, he turned around to me and said, you should have realized that that was genuine. And I said, why? He said, look at the quality of that paper. That's been paid for by taxpayers' money. And I said, yeah, but they'll go to any and all lengths to get me. He really will.
Yeah, that's right. Given what you won the MBE for, it would be surprising if you didn't think it was a scam. But no, that's hilarious. So yeah, a great story. Then yeah, congrats. That must be such a shocking moment when that came through the post. Um,
It absolutely is, and as well, meeting King Charles to be presented with it, because it was so close to Christmas, because it was on the 19th of December last year. I'd resigned myself to, I'm sure it's going to be Prince William or possibly Princess Anne. I thought maybe King Charles would have gone to Sandringham by then, ready for Christmas. Got to Windsor the day before, and then on the night, I'm looking at BBC News and saw a news item that Prince William had to go out to Kuwait because somebody quite prominent had passed away over there, so he'd gone to represent the royal family, etc. So I thought, oh, it's probably going to be Princess Anne. And then I'm driving up to the castle, and I'd gone with my cousin and a couple of friends. And one of my friends said, the flag's flying to signify that the monarch's in residence, so you've got the king. And oh my goodness, I was so nervous from that point forward. I can't tell you, but he was so nice and put you at ease. And yeah, the little chat to him, it was a really lovely moment. So
oh
and
man,
really honoured as well. So honoured.
yeah. No, I imagine, yeah, what a moment that must have been. You touched on imposter syndrome a little bit. That's
Mm,
a topic that comes up a lot in our podcast, and it's interesting. The guests
yeah.
that we interview here are all very successful people. Some of them are CEOs of 1,000-person company. Others are entrepreneurs and scientists. And we interviewed someone who's a rocket scientist at NASA. Every single person struggles with imposter syndrome. Like, no matter how successful they are, I think that's one of the common threads that links everyone together that's on this podcast. Do you think imposter syndrome is more prevalent in divergent people?
I actually do. And funny enough, I've actually done some research into a couple of areas on this. One, as you've just said, is it more prevalent in those that are neurodivergent? And that's certainly something that I found, and something that for me I've struggled with for forever. Everything that I've done is I've always had the biggest amounts of imposter syndrome. So much so, in fact, that I'm actually a co-founder, along with two of my colleagues, of International Imposter Syndrome Awareness Day, because we don't talk about it a lot. As you rightly said, it's something that everybody has to some degree, yet nobody sort of wants to talk about it or admit to it, because that would almost reinforce that they're flawed in some way. So we have the Awareness Day on 13th of April. We've been running it for about 3 odd years now, just to open up the conversation about it and get more people talking about it, and sort of go and giving a few hints and tips and things that might help to. I'll never say overcome it, because I think it's something you'd never overcome. I prefer to say it's something you learn to manage a bit more. And I've just this last month in January, I did a course on neurodiversity in the workplace, so that I can actually go out into organizations and train them about the benefits of hiring neurodivergent people like myself, and the reasonable adjustments and things that they can put in place. And one of the ladies on the cohort, it had a really interesting take on it, and I hope she'll come and do a discussion with me on the day, because she actually has given a name to her imposter syndrome, and she calls it Doris. And she's always telling Doris to go away or shut up when those voices are there. And I just thought that was so good that she given imposter syndrome a name like that.
No, that's funny. Yeah, it obviously humanizes it when you give it a name. It is definitely a thing. Like, I could hear Doris in my mind a lot of the time. You're supposed to be here. Is the role you're in too big for you? Yeah, no, that's funny. We're nearly at the end of our time, which has gone really quickly. It's been a really great conversation. The last question: you obviously work on the cusp of innovation. There's a number of different things that you're doing right now. Tell me something that you're really excited about for 2024.
Yeah. I'm excited to see where AI is going. I think there's some great potential and so on there, but I think from a security side of it, I think a lot more needs to be done. A lot more thought needs to go into it. And so I mentioned about cyber criminals using the learning language models like ChatGPT to craft phishing emails and so on, for example. But also, some of those learning language models are also being used to write malicious code and things like that. So I'm excited, but I also think there needs to be a lot more thought and governance and so on into it, because it's one of those that the genie is kind of out of the bottle now. It's out. Everything these days is it's AI this or AI that or so on. But I think, yes, some careful consideration around the security aspects of it do need to be looked at.
Yeah, I've heard, and I hope this is the case, that a lot of real major leaders in this world, like the Elon Musks and the like, are really collaborating on the dangers of AI and making sure that we keep things up and it doesn't become just like out of control software that could really damage the world. Anyway, I mean, that's all we have time for today. I mean, Lisa, thank you so much. And I think we've covered two relatively different topics with the cybersecurity and then going into neurodiversity. But yeah, I thought it was a really fantastic discussion. I'm sure our listeners will feel likewise. And yeah, just very much appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor today, Chris. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Please dial in next week for our next episode.
Thank you so much for listening to today's Her Success podcast, brought to you by Intel. We hope you found it inspiring and insightful. For more conversations with inspirational women, why not check out our interviews from season 1? If you enjoy the podcast, please take a moment to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us grow and reach more listeners who can benefit from these empowering conversations. Don't forget to connect with us on LinkedIn at Her Success and follow us on Instagram at Her Success Community for a daily dose of inspiration. Want even more Her Success in your life? Sign up for our newsletter on our website to receive exclusive information on future episodes, blogs by our amazing guests, special features, upcoming events, and much more. Thank you for being a part of Her Success Community. Stay tuned for our next episode in 2 weeks' time.